This is the third and last installment of the 3 episodes that concentrate and perhaps encourages others to give Oats Studios a watch on YouTube and Steam for free. With Neill Blomkamp at the helm, it's been a beautifully crafted burst of sci-fi shorts with effects that could make the big production companies do a double take. The concept of making a production company place sci-fi short plots on YouTube and Steam, ranging from 20 minutes or more, is really about the feedback. And in this one, Firebase, it had gotten to the point of crowdfunding. However, the plug was pulled around 2 days in because they wanted to make an awesome film, not an average one. Therefore, even though figures were not released, Neill made refunds to everyone, explaining that it wasn't enough for the vision he has, as he felt his audience deserved the best. Also, with the indication that this wasn't the end. So let's take a look at the short that almost made it big. This is 2 takes, and this is 1 shot, an analysis of the sci-fi short made by Oats Studios, Firebase, Part 3. Be warned, there are spoilers ahead. After watching this, the research for this sci-fi short almost came to an absolute stop when Neill made his ideas clear in an interview with Andrew Liptak from The Verge. Andrew asks, Firebase is set in the Vietnam War, and it has some pretty horrifying things going on, even for a war. What inspired this story, and where did it come from? Neill answered, the initial idea was the concept of living in a virtual simulation. Simulation hypothesis was the core basis. The theory behind this was born out of the idea that we exist in a simulated construct, where there are errors or anomalies. If you think of the universe or a piece of software, then there would be the self-correcting code that would come in and fix the erroneous code. We come up with the idea that someone who accidentally breaks through the program and is able to see and understand that there's more to reality than the level they exist in. We wanted someone who could play with the laws of thermodynamics, time and space. In the case of the river god, he's acting almost subconsciously. He's more of an error or an anomaly. Plus, the idea of a science fiction story set in Vietnam is interesting, and a concept I haven't seen that much of. In this film, the river god starts tampering with the fabric of space-time. This universe corrects that by sending in people like Heinz, who don't understand why they were drawn to these anomalies, or what their purpose is. They just know that they have to stop this thing from happening. On a higher level, it's almost like an antivirus program. Now you would think that I could potentially stop this episode right here, but I had to research this further to clarify some things, making some interesting, if small, discoveries. Also, the initial concept, though presented in a spectacularly visual and integrated way, the idea of it all being like an anomaly within a computer could remind people of movies such as The Matrix. Not a new idea, but presented in a different format. Therefore, let's go deeper into the river god and the importance of the power of 3s. The first instance, after watching Firebase a second time around, was the hints that were dropped that something was happening behind the scenes that perhaps even the characters themselves were not aware of. In the first 10 minutes, we are catapulted into rare footage from the Central Intelligence Agency, dubbing this event the Omega event. The interview with the woman next to the hut in the jungle was actually the deceased wife of the farmer that turns into the river god. They ask where her husband is, and she explains that he went down to the river fields to pray. Then almost immediately, things began to float in the air, some even disassembling, such as tanks, helicopters, and cars. Everything that was based on war and from the Americans. It gave the impression that perhaps the farmer had a connection to his faith in a large way, establishing connections to a higher power and having his prayers being answered. And notice, at this time, that it was passive. Nothing was destroyed, only taken away peacefully. It is only a year later that we are introduced to Sergeant Heinz, who is asked by the same agency to kill the thing the farmer has turned into, that many in the area have come to call the river god. Before we get into the aspects of why and how, there is the implication of understanding the folk religion within the area of Vietnam that presented this outcome. As this is explained further, you can notice a crossover and intermingling of Vietnamese and Chinese religions, since they both have the same theme. Vietnamese folk religion is not an organised religious system, but rather a set of local worship traditions devoted to the Han, or the Chinese equivalent Shen, both meaning god, deity, or spirit. These spirits or gods were intimately involved in the affairs of the world, whilst also having the power to generate entities like rivers, mountains, and stars. These gods were also established within the human spirit or psyche, benefiting the basic power/agency that humans have, especially in the sense of wonder and furthering life to the fullest potential. With this in mind, spirits can manifest from this power and transform it to actualize into reality, into a potential something that could happen. Basically, if you believe it enough, you have the spirits on your side to make something into reality. Unlike the Chinese yin and yang aspect of order and disorder, the Vietnamese have this middling ground of both elements, called the Lin, or Chinese Ling. This is the medium between yin and yang, that is the order of creation. It is the state of power of the gods and divine beings, Shen or Han. This is multiplied by humans having a vision during a trance through a ritual of inspiration into objects that represent them, such as the talisman. Their activity is the actuality and the manifesting of divinity, or the Latin word numen, also meaning divine presence, that can be reciprocated via offerings and pledges or devotion to a deity or a demon. Lien can also be described as the linking and setting up of different things, such as spatial and temporal boundaries, and since it is the middle ground representing the gods, this spiritual mediumship can make an individual the centre of actualizing possibilities, acts, and events that can perhaps be bent within social constructs and history. Like what was explained earlier, it's on the basis of nurturing and regenerating an idea, perhaps by a reenactment that can imagine and motivate a reality the individual wants. If one believes it enough, it might come true. There is this impression that the farmer, from actualizing an idea or perhaps wanting the Americans to simply leave, and for that to manifest as disassembling tanks and making things float into nothingness, is then being pushed to the edge with grief. Remember, his family had nothing to do with the war, they were just victims of it all. Through his grief from the murder of his wife and children, he pledged his soul to something other, perhaps a demon, but a deity nonetheless. In this instance, the change was immediate. His grief had stripped back his humanity, love, and humility, and even his skin, to present this being, this demigod of sorts, that wreaked chaos throughout the jungle through his avoidance of his bereavement. Some say that when someone close dies, you die a little inside also. In this case, it can be understood that the farmer had his humanity killed and replaced with something else, perhaps something from a different realm of existence. If we followed Neill's ideology of it being like a computer program, grief can affect a person's life, much like a corruptive file program can corrupt the entire simulation. It knocks things, and people, off their axis, and the day-to-day existence becomes a different code, or a different path creating anomalies, much like the river god itself. As Jacob Palmer from the Central Intelligence Agency remarked, the river god is brandishing his own version of hell, complete with raising dead soldiers and manipulating their insides to something like a cockroach. And so, like the river god is a virus, it spreads and affects those open to infection, the dead. But how does that explain the alternative realities that are opened and closed? The river god pulled a soldier out of his current reality in the Vietnamese jungle and put him into another, and then pulled him back again on fire. Both realities are real, but the idea is that they are existing simultaneously, much like a multiple choice RPG game, much like a computer in a simulation. However, interconnecting these different realities together, a crossover, also overlaps different servers, making the code perhaps increase in its anomalies. Now let's look at this a different way. Going back to the ideology that the farmer believed in, many Vietnamese people believed in Taoism, Daoism, and Etienne. Taoism is a philosophical tradition of Chinese origin that emphasized the idea of living in harmony with the Tao, all the way. Going with the flow, so to speak. However, these ethics vary depending on which school, but each depend on the three treasures: compassion, frugality, and humility. which is no longer relevant to the farmer that had turned into the river god. Tian is the celestial aspect of the cosmos, often translated as heaven, which is mentioned in relation to Dai, often translated as earth. In Taoism, these both are the representative cosmology of the dualistic nature of Taoism, and are thought to maintain the two poles of the three realms of reality: the middle realm occupied by humanity, Shen, the lower occupied by demons, Mo, and the ghosts, the damned, specifically, Gui. Like the concept of heaven, earth, and hell, there is always us, the humans, in the middle. And like in Buddhist religion, another belief system in Vietnam, there are three worlds of karmic rebirth, with the world of desire, the middle world, the world we live in, places animals, humans, demons, and lower demigods in the same reality. Therefore, this belief system, perhaps in many religions, of an aspect of heaven, hell, and us in the middle, is universal. It's almost as if the river god has glimpsed the concept of hell on earth and wishes for it to be true, crossing over worlds and bringing his friends with him in corpses. He is going with the flow, the Tao, in a dangerous manner. If you also notice the logo of the skeleton with a dagger in its mouth and a hat pointing in three different directions, that could emphasize the concept of threes and hint that the CIA already know about the different worlds. We could even suggest the river god coming from hell, Sergeant Hines coming from heaven, and us humans are stuck in the middle, an us against them analogy. Simple, right? Perhaps too simple. But let's take it further. It is understood that the river god is a god, or a demigod, that perhaps manifested by the collision of beliefs or realities. However, has it been considered the same for Sergeant Hines? We understand that he is important, as Palmer explains. Hines isn't meant to die. Hines is protected by a divine hand. Objects were put in your path to shield you, put there to protect you in the exact right moment, to shield you from the right piece of shrapnel. It's almost as if life itself knew you were coming, the universe keeping you alive, saving you, as though it had a plan for you. This idea is true. However, there is more to this character than a hunter looking for that anomaly. Sergeant Hines seems to have visions, headaches, takes pills for some sort of relief, and cannot sleep. It can be understood in one way that someone that is obsessed over something might act like that. But what if it was because Hines, like the river god, is not supposed to be in this reality as well? There is no interpretive conversation where Palmer suggests that he could help Hines remember who he is and why he's here, as it's slipping away from him. So, like the river god, quite literally letting go everything human in him, Hines could possibly be doing the same on an unconscious level, slowly and steadily. And instead of the simulation of this reality rejecting him, it's being manipulated around him for his benefit. If we go back to the Shin, the idea of deities manifesting from the power of the psyche, this could be the same for Hines as it is for the river god. Remember, the cosmic force of the gods are in the middle, influenced by us, the humans. The other sides, yang, disorder, much like the virus, the river god, and yin, order, the antivirus, or Sergeant Hines. There is always something against something, with humans in the middle. And as we are always in the middle, there's always going to be the connection to the power of threes, perfectly in balance, like a triangle. But remember, this is just a theory. Like many things that cannot be explained by any soldier that was in the jungle, their perception of what is real and what is not is set aside for the goal of destroying something godlike. In the opening credits of Firebase, Neill chose to quote, "This world is not our permanent home. We are looking forward to a home yet to come." Hebrews 13:14. The aspect of realities intertwining, of gods perhaps becoming a reality through the power of the human psyche, of anomalies and the cracks of concurrent realities existing simultaneously. It boils down to the belief system one has and the endurance of the human soul in that journey, whether that be in Taoism or an American in a war. Like the heroes of the faith, Noah, Abraham, etc., they placed their trust in God, with a major component of it understanding the concept of eternity. Instead of seeking an earthly home, they recognise themselves as only pilgrims on earth, and so, this belief is emphasised on the understanding that everything on earth is temporary, including suffering. And the ideology of the river god setting himself completely free understood that completely. The suffering he had endured in his human life was fleeting until it became something other, to which the suffering, once internal through grief, became external and real around him in terms of godlike powers. From a good versus evil plan, there's always more behind that curtain, and therefore, like Neill's explanation of the sci-fi short being like a virus versus antivirus program in a simulation, I can concur using philosophy and psychology in a more humanistic approach. But it all boils down to you, the audience, and what you take from what you see. If you enjoyed what was said, please follow me on Anchor, Spotify, and other podcasting platforms for the latest episode, and be kept in the loop through my Instagram, at 2takes_podcast. If you want to help me in the making of each episode, there is a listener support platform that can benefit the levelling up of this podcast, as well as have you, a supporter, having access to extra content. Find this at anchor.fm/2takespodcast/support. And as always, thanks for listening.